Flight attendant told a black woman to use the back entrance. She bought the airline and fired her. Dark clouds pressed against the windows of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport as a storm rolled in, but inside Concourse D, a far more unsettling tension brewed. A flight attendant, sporting a crisp uniform and a cold, scornful gaze, pointed a black woman toward a seldom-used back entrance, insisting she couldn't board like everyone else. Passengers went quiet, uncertain if they should intervene or stay silent. Little did anyone suspect that this singular act of blatant discrimination would set off a chain of events so shocking it would change both women's lives forever and rattle the entire aviation industry to its core. Imani Bennett was excited to be heading home. She had spent an exhausting week in Houston drumming up funds for her latest educational non-profit initiative. The conference had been draining, yet successful. She'd cultivated new donors and formed valuable partnerships. Still, the highlight of her journey was the prospect of returning to Atlanta, her hometown, to surprise her sister on her birthday. It was a simple pleasure she hadn't tasted in months. She arrived at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport earlier than expected, wanting to beat the rush. Her chosen airline, Ascendant Airways, had routes that fitted her schedule perfectly. The day had been good, her mood buoyant, and all she needed now was a smooth boarding process. The terminal was bustling that afternoon. Rolling suitcases clacked in synchronized chaos along polished floors. Announcements of delayed flights and final boarding calls echoed overhead. Families gathered at gates, couples sipped coffee, and lone business travelers tapped away on laptops. Imani let out a content sigh, grateful for the success she was about to celebrate with her sister. Then, in mere seconds, her world flipped. She approached the boarding gate with her carry-on in tow, wearing a casual blazer and neatly pressed pants. Before she could hand over her boarding pass, a flight attendant name tag glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights as C. Watson glowered at her. Watson was in her late 40s, hair tightly scraped into a bun, lips pressed into a resolute line, and posture rigid with an air of authority. "Excuse me, ma'am," Watson said, voice tinted with undisguised annoyance. "You can't board from here." Imani looked around, confused. "I'm sorry? My seat is in business class, and Watson cut her off with a dismissive gesture and lowered her voice. "You need to use the back entrance." There was a stunned pause. Around them, the hum of conversation dimmed, as if the entire waiting area sensed tension climbing. A few onlookers turned their heads, eyes flicking between Imani and the flight attendant. Imani blinked, trying to process. Back entrance? She had flown Ascendant Airways countless times, never once asked to board through any back entrance. One might assume the flight attendant was referencing some special ramp, but the icy stare and pointed tone rang differently. It wasn't protocol. It was something else, something deeply humiliating. "I'm sorry, but I have a priority pass," Imani managed to say, her voice cracking with a mix of confusion and anger. "I'm allowed to board with the business group." Watson's lips curled. "Not in my line, you're not. There's an entrance in the rear for special accommodations. It's better if you go there." Imani felt her cheeks burn, a swirl of emotions churning in her chest. She could almost see the flight attendant's disdain flaring in her eyes, but what stunned her most was the hush that fell over onlookers. Some stared wide-eyed and uneasy, while others looked away, perhaps too timid to get involved. The moment stretched into an unbearable tableau of shame and shock. Imani's mind whirled. She wasn't a timid woman. She'd built her career on championing the underprivileged. She'd confronted bigots before, but never so publicly, and never from someone with an airline's authority behind them. This was a new, ugly experience. Finally, she found her voice. "I need to speak to your supervisor," she said, eyes flickering with steely resolve. Watson's scowl deepened. Supervisors don't have time for your drama. Either use the back entrance or step aside. That was the moment other passengers started to protest. A younger woman in line, Tasha, pulled out her phone. "This is messed up," Tasha whispered audibly to her companion as she started recording. "You can't talk to her like that." Imani stood rooted, uncertain whether to continue insisting on her rights or to walk away. Her heart hammered. She caught sight of a child staring at them curiously, big eyes wide with confusion. That child's innocent expression drilled into Imani's soul. Did the child see injustice? Would the child remember and learn that this was how the world worked? Security guards approached, alerted by the commotion. The crowd parted, and an Attendant Airways gate supervisor hurried over, wearing a forced, pleasant smile that faltered the moment she saw how many people were recording with their phones. "Is there a problem here?" the supervisor asked. Before Watson could speak, Imani stepped forward. "This flight attendant told me to use the back entrance, even though I have a business-class ticket. She won't let me board like everyone else." The supervisor's face flushed. I'm so sorry. There must be a misunderstanding." Imani's voice shook with anger. "No misunderstanding. I know exactly what this is." The tension was choking. Watson stood there, arms folded, refusing to back down. The crowd remained silent, cameras rolling, capturing every breath, every second of the unfolding confrontation. Imani turned to the supervisor. "I want to board my flight with my assigned group, in the seat I paid for, and not be subjected to this discrimination." The supervisor nodded hastily. "Of course, we'll handle this, Miss Watson. Come with me, please." Watson didn't move for a moment, almost daring the supervisor to side with her. The air was thick with unspoken words. And then, as if snapping from a trance, the flight attendant turned on her heel and followed the supervisor. A formal apology was issued to Imani in front of the gate, but it felt hollow. The damage was done. A hush still clung to the area as she finally boarded, walking past rows of seats, while a hot flush of indignation and hurt rose in her throat. Imani took her seat and stared out the window, tears threatening to spill. This was 2025 in one of the busiest airports in the world, and she had just been humiliated in front of a crowd for nothing more than her skin color. She swallowed. The seatbelt sign blinked overhead, but the seatbelt felt like a noose. She was trapped in a system that allowed bigotry to slip through cracks. She closed her eyes, letting out a trembling exhale. Little did she know, at that moment, the seeds of a monumental shift were being planted, seeds that would take root in the swirl of social media, corporate politics, and personal ambition. But for now, all she could think was, why me? Once the plane landed in Atlanta, Imani mustered composure enough to gather her luggage and exit. She thought the ordeal would end there, chalked up as yet another incident of racial discrimination that would be met with shrugs or, at best, a quiet apology from the airline. But fate had different plans. Within hours of the flight's landing, Tasha's cell phone video, capturing the cringe-worthy exchange at the gate, exploded across social media. The edited clip, only a minute long, condensed the moment into a brutal highlight. Flight attendant Watson sneering, pointing imperiously, commanding Imani to use the back entrance. The final shot featured the supervisor's panic-stricken face when confronted with the possibility of a lawsuit or public relations catastrophe. By the time Imani woke the next morning, her phone was buzzing non-stop with texts, voicemails, and emails. Friends, colleagues, even distant acquaintances were reaching out, expressing their shock and support. Hashtags like #backentrance and #boycottascendant trended on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. The local news channels in Atlanta had picked up the story too. Several used phrases like systemic racism and modern-day segregation, with experts weighing in on the severity of the incident. Late-night talk shows got hold of the clip and aired snippets, fueling the fire of public discourse. Imani scrolled through the comments, her stomach twisting. She hadn't asked for any of this attention. She was just a passenger who wanted to fly home. Yet seeing the fury of strangers left her torn. Part of her felt validated, but another part dreaded the backlash that inevitably accompanied public outcry. Messages of hate and doubt trickled in, too, from internet trolls or skeptics accusing Imani of playing the race card or staging the incident. A swirl of misinformation and conspiracy theories followed, which only fanned more heated debates. That morning, Imani was supposed to have a celebratory brunch with her sister, Talia, for her birthday. But the moment she picked up Talia from her apartment in a modest part of downtown Atlanta, they drove in silence. Talia scrolled through her phone, reading updates as they rolled in. "Imani," Talia murmured, eyes scanning her screen. "Everybody wants to talk to you. CNN, MSNBC, local radio stations. They're calling this a watershed moment." Imani stared at the road ahead, hands clenching the steering wheel. "A watershed moment? For what?" she asked softly. "This has been going on for decades. I just got unlucky that it happened in front of a camera." Talia pressed her lips together, glancing at her big sister. "You were humiliated, yes, but this is a chance to talk about it. People are rallying behind you. I'm seeing folks threatening to cancel their flights, boycott Ascendant Airways. It's huge, huge." That word lingered in Imani's mind. She'd spent years building non-profits to address educational inequalities, focusing on bridging achievement gaps for underrepresented children. She was no stranger to activism, but now, overnight, she had become the face of a new cause, confronting racial discrimination within the airline industry. When they arrived at the small cafe for brunch, reporters were already waiting outside, cameras in tow. Talia gasped. "We can go somewhere else," she offered hastily. Imani shook her head, glancing at the huddle of journalists. The curious part of her recognized that running away would only inflame speculation. She was also fully aware that these sorts of impromptu press scrums often died down once a statement was issued. Her voice might calm or redirect the frenzy. She took a breath and stepped out of the car, Talia at her side. Immediately, microphones and cell phones were thrust in her direction. People asked a flurry of questions. "Do you plan to sue Ascendant Airways? Are you leading a boycott? Have you spoken with the airline's CEO? How did this incident make you feel?" For a moment, Imani froze. She felt Talia's hand on her shoulder, a small encouragement. "This is your moment. I want to say," Imani began, voice trembling slightly. She cleared her throat. "I want to say that no one should experience what I experienced, ever. Discrimination in any form is unacceptable. I'm still reeling from it, and I haven't decided yet on next steps." A reporter shouted. "So you might sue?" Imani exhaled. "All options are on the table. Right now, I just want to process what happened. I appreciate the support from everyone who's reached out. But if I do decide on legal action or activism, I'll make a public statement. For now, my sister's waiting on her birthday pancakes." That small bit of humor loosened the tension. Reporters backed off, though a few continued filming as Imani and Talia entered the cafe. Despite her attempt to appear calm, her mind was far from at ease. Questions hammered at her. Could she take on a giant like Ascendant Airways, one of the largest carriers in the US? Could she survive the onslaught of trolls and corporate lawyers that would inevitably follow? Still, a spark of determination lit inside her. It was more than anger or personal indignation. She had spent her life fighting for justice in educational circles, but perhaps this was the impetus to broaden her scope. So many people were hurt daily by casual racism, microaggressions, and institutional biases. Maybe she could do something more. After brunch, they parted ways. Talia insisted Imani stay strong, and Imani insisted Talia enjoy her birthday. Imani then returned to her townhouse, a modest but cozy place not far from Georgia State University. She tried to go through her usual routine, answering work emails, scheduling Zoom meetings with non-profit partners, but her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Around midday, she received an unexpected call from a corporate liaison at Ascendant Airways. The voice on the other end belonged to someone named Deborah Price, who introduced herself as the Assistant Public Relations Director. Price's voice was sticky with contrition and corporate nuance. "Miss Bennett, we sincerely apologize for the distressing incident that took place yesterday. We want you to know Ascendant Airways does not tolerate discrimination of any kind, and we are investigating the matter." Imani nodded slowly, even though Price couldn't see her. "I understand you have to say that, but do you understand how humiliating that was, not just for me, but for everyone who watched it happen?" "We do. Our leadership is extremely concerned," Price said, voice quivering with a rehearsed sincerity. "We'd like to invite you for a private meeting at our headquarters. Our CEO, Andrew Sutherland, would like to personally extend his apologies and discuss how we can move forward." Imani's heart thudded. She wasn't sure if she was ready to face the top brass of an airline, but she also knew that refusing might look like she was shying away. If she wanted real change, maybe meeting them face to face was the first step. "All right," Imani said, "I'll speak with Mr. Sutherland, but on my terms. No cameras, no press statement until I say so." Price agreed enthusiastically. They scheduled the meeting for the following week, giving Imani time to gather her thoughts and also see if the story would continue to build momentum in the media. By the time evening came, Imani felt a wave of exhaustion that had nothing to do with physical exertion. The emotional toll of the day was crushing. She flopped onto her couch, scrolled through Twitter, and saw that the incident had inspired a trending conversation about racial profiling in the airline industry. Countless others were sharing their stories: rude flight attendants, suspicious stares from fellow passengers, humiliating searches by TSA. Imani closed her eyes, her mind swirling with the question of what would happen next. She'd never considered herself a crusader for air travel equity, but here she was, thrust onto center stage. For better or worse, her life would never be the same again. Imani's scheduled meeting with Ascendant Airways was still days away, but the pressure showed no signs of letting up. By midweek, a CNN anchor had devoted a primetime segment to the hashtag back entrance scandal, featuring activist commentators and civil rights attorneys who railed against bigotry in the skies. Professional organizations and non-profits Imani had worked with for years bombarded her with messages of solidarity. Publicly, they posted statements condemning Ascendant Airways and vowing to stand by Imani. Privately, some expressed concern that the conflict might overshadow her existing philanthropic projects. Meanwhile, Talia updated Imani daily with tidbits gleaned from social media. "Twitter is on fire," Talia said one evening. "People are calling Ascendant's apology a band-aid on a bullet wound. The CEO's name, Andrew Sutherland, is trending. People want him to step down if the airline doesn't fix its systemic issues." Imani frowned. She had never intended to topple a corporation. When she'd asked the flight attendant to speak with a supervisor, she only wanted to board in dignity. Yet here they were, and every hour the scandal built. In the midst of this media cyclone, a surprising figure emerged: Charlotte Watson, the flight attendant. Soon after the incident, she had been placed on administrative leave, pending investigation. Her own version of events, peddled through an interview on a fringe YouTube channel, was that Imani had been combative and that she, Watson, was only following special boarding procedures for passengers with special needs. For a few days, that clip circulated among certain circles, offering an alternative viewpoint. But it quickly crumbled under scrutiny when multiple eyewitnesses, including Tasha, posted their phone videos showing that Imani had never claimed a special need. She simply produced a business-class ticket and expected to board. The public deemed Watson's excuse a transparent lie. Then Watson disappeared from the public eye. She stopped responding to interview requests and was rumored to have enlisted the services of a high-powered attorney known for defending airline employees in labor disputes. Imani tried to tune out the swirling narratives. She had a meeting to prepare for. She spent hours drafting notes, bullet points of demands, or at least concerns she wanted addressed. A formal, transparent investigation into discrimination complaints at Ascendant Airways racial bias training for staff, mandated and ongoing a sincere apology from top executives, not just a PR script. Imani knew such demands might be brushed off as mere PR fluff if the airline wasn't truly willing to change. So she also made notes of potential leverage points: public sentiment, the threat of a class action lawsuit, civil rights organizations that could back her. On Thursday night, a day before her meeting, Imani got a call from a familiar voice, her mentor and former professor, Dr. Justine McLeod, an esteemed voice in the field of social justice. "Imani, Dr. McLeod said warmly, "I've been watching everything unfold. How are you holding up?" Imani sank into her office chair and massaged her temples. "I'm overwhelmed. I'm not used to this kind of spotlight." "You're handling it with grace," Dr. McLeod reassured her. "Listen, if you need any support, research, connections, legal advisors, you have a network behind you." Imani felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "Thank you, Dr. McLeod. I might need help after my meeting with Andrew Sutherland." "Don't let them steamroll you," Dr. McLeod cautioned. "They'll try to placate you with vague promises. Stand firm, my dear." That night, Imani tossed and turned, haunted by nightmares of being corralled to a back entrance on an endless loop, while faceless crowds pointed and jeered. She awoke before dawn, adrenaline already spiking at the thought of the meeting. Ascendant Airways maintained an imposing headquarters in a gleaming glass tower on the outskirts of Atlanta's business district. The building was all angles and reflective surfaces, looming over the surrounding streets like a modern monolith. Imani arrived early, still dressed in a professional yet understated ensemble, a navy pencil skirt, cream blouse, and low heels. She wanted no missteps that could be twisted against her. Security at the lobby escorted her to the 38th floor, where PR Director Deborah Price greeted her with a tight smile. "Thank you for coming, Miss Bennett," Price said. "Mr. Sutherland is looking forward to speaking with you." They led Imani into an expansive conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows. The Atlanta skyline sprawled below, a testament to commerce and ambition. Two other executives sat at a polished wooden table, an HR representative named Lucia Kingston and a legal counsel, Robert Fields. Both wore professional masks of polite concern. Then Andrew Sutherland entered. He was tall, with silver hair, an immaculate suit, and a purposeful stride. He extended his hand to Imani, who accepted it warily. "Miss Bennett," Sutherland said, voice resonant, "I apologize for the circumstances that bring us together. Please, have a seat." They settled around the table, and Deborah Price poured water from a sleek carafe. Imani felt the weight of their attention pressing on her. She cleared her throat, determined not to let nerves silence her. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she began, glancing at each face in the room. "It's no secret that public pressure forced this. Otherwise, I doubt we'd be sitting here." Sutherland inclined his head. "We understand the gravity of this situation. Ascendant Airways prides itself on diversity and inclusion. What happened to you should never happen to any passenger." Imani nodded, unsmiling. "I want to hear what specific measures you're prepared to take. Not just for me, but to ensure no one else endures this kind of discrimination." A flicker of discomfort crossed Sutherland's features. He seemed unaccustomed to being challenged so directly. We're committed to a full internal review of our policies and staff training programs, he said. Miss Watson has been suspended pending the outcome of that review. If we find conclusive evidence of misconduct, Imani interjected, the evidence is on video for the entire world to see. The legal counsel, Robert Fields, cleared his throat. Let's not rush to judgment. Investigations must follow procedure. That's for everyone's protection. Imani's eyes flashed. Let's be honest, you're worried about wrongful termination suits. But the public sees that video. Delay tactics don't inspire confidence. Silence. Andrew Sutherland drew a deep breath. We're prepared to make changes. We'd like your help in shaping those changes, perhaps a partnership with your organization, focusing on awareness and training. Imani stared at him, brows knit. So now you want me to be your poster child for awareness. You want me to co-sign your brand even though you haven't proven you can fix the internal culture that allowed this. Deborah Price jumped in, voice soothing. Miss Bennett, we respect your perspective. We're open to negotiating, but please understand, we do want to move in a positive direction. Imani fiddled with her pen, thinking quickly. The opportunity to effect real change at a major airline was enormous, but she couldn't let them dangle a feel-good partnership just to quell the public relations nightmare. I have a few conditions, she said finally. Name them, Sutherland encouraged. Imani enumerated. 1. A comprehensive, third-party-led racial sensitivity training for all Ascendant employees, flight crews, gate agents, executives, everyone. 2. A public apology that acknowledges systemic racism, not just one employee's actions. 3. Transparent handling of Miss Watson's case. And 4. A sizable donation to national civil rights organizations that address racial profiling. Her boldness hung in the air, a litany that spelled both liability and moral imperative. The executives exchanged glances. Fields looked tense, but Sutherland maintained a measured composure. These are significant demands, Sutherland said carefully. We'd need to evaluate feasibility. The donation in particular, sir, Imani cut in. I already have enough supporters urging me to sue Ascendant Airways for millions. These demands are moderate compared to a lawsuit that could drag your brand through a very public legal battle. Lucia Kingston, the HR representative, shifted in her seat, then spoke softly. We're prepared to meet you halfway. We want to do the right thing. I'm sure we can find an arrangement that benefits all parties. Silence lingered. Imani felt both relief and suspicion. She knew this wasn't a final agreement, just a willingness to negotiate. But it was a step. Thank you for your time, Imani said, rising. I'll wait for your revised proposal in writing. Then we can talk specifics. Sutherland stood, offering a perfunctory handshake. Thank you, Miss Bennett. We appreciate your patience and willingness to find a solution. Imani left the headquarters feeling a strange mix of triumph and dread. She had stood her ground, but corporations were adept at dodging accountability. For now, she'd wait and see if their sincerity proved genuine. She spent the rest of the day fielding calls from reporters, telling them only that she had met with Ascendant Airways to discuss solutions. She refused to elaborate further, not wanting to tip her hand. At home, she sank onto her couch, exhaustion washing over her. In her mind, she replayed the stern, polished faces of Ascendant's top executives. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were offering her tidbits to quiet the storm, rather than truly overhauling the system. Imani then allowed herself a moment of introspection. She had always been an advocate, an activist in her own sphere. Now she was dealing with corporate boardrooms, legal counsels, and demands that could shape policy for thousands of employees. The magnitude of it all made her head spin. Little did she know, this meeting was only the prologue to a far bigger drama, unfolding behind the scenes, one that would eventually catapult her into a position she never imagined. The next few weeks were a roller coaster for Imani. Public scrutiny of Ascendant Airways grew louder as more people shared stories of subtle or overt discrimination. Some recounted being asked for extra ID checks, despite having valid boarding passes. Others described rude flight attendants who seemed to single them out over minor carry-on issues. Imani remained front and center of the media narrative. She tried to keep focus on her non-profit work, but the phone calls, interviews, and social media mentions didn't relent. She was invited to speak at a high-profile panel in Los Angeles addressing racism in corporate America. She hesitated, but friends convinced her it was an opportunity to champion broader reforms. Meanwhile, the airline's PR machine churned out press releases about improved training protocols and diversity workshops. Yet no official statement directly acknowledged Imani's 4 conditions. Late one evening, Talia came over, armed with takeout and a concerned expression. They spread the containers across Imani's small dining table, the scents of sesame chicken and fried rice wafting in the air. "Any news from Ascendant?" Talia asked. Imani shook her head, pushing a broccoli floret around her plate. Radio silence. "After our meeting, I got a generic email from Deborah Price saying they're considering my input. Nothing else." Talia frowned. "Maybe they're waiting for the uproar to die down." Imani sighed. "Probably. The cynic in me thinks they'll do the bare minimum, then claim the matter resolved. And I'll have to decide if I want to pursue legal action." A few moments of companionable silence passed as they ate. Then Talia brightened. "On a more cheerful note, your social media following has tripled, and I hear folks are calling you for keynote speeches. Some are even talking about you as a potential political candidate." Imani gave a short laugh. "Politics isn't in my plan. I just want equity and justice." They continued chatting, discussing Talia's upcoming art show. The tension eased, at least for the moment, but a phone call soon yanked them back into the storm. It was Deborah Price from Ascendant. Imani picked up, heart pounding. "Hello, Miss Bennett," Price greeted. "I hope I'm not disturbing you too late." Imani glanced at the time. It was nearly 9 p.m. "It's fine. I'm calling with news," Price said, voice tense. "Miss Watson's administrative hearing concluded. She's been found in violation of multiple company policies, including the code of conduct relating to discrimination. She will be terminated immediately." Imani exchanged a glance with Talia. The flight attendant was fired. "The first step of many?" "I see," she said carefully. "What about the other employees who might be engaging in similar conduct? What about the systemic changes I requested?" Price hesitated. "We are finalizing a statement and will be issuing it tomorrow. Ascendant is rolling out a new mandatory training initiative for employees worldwide. We'd also like to invite you to a press conference if you're willing." Imani's mind whirred. A press conference could be a double-edged sword. She decided to stay cautious. "I'll consider it." "Send me the details." That night, she barely slept, replaying Price's announcement. Watson was officially gone, but was this a scapegoat scenario or genuine accountability? The next morning, Ascendant's official press release made headlines. It cited Miss Watson's termination due to unprofessional conduct, confirmed the rollout of diversity and inclusion training modules for all staff, and even hinted at financial contributions to certain civil rights organizations. Yet they still didn't mention Imani's name or address her specific demands in detail. The statement read like a typical crisis control blueprint: admit minimal fault, take swift action on a single bad actor, promise vague improvements. Frustration roiled inside Imani. During the day, she fielded calls from journalists, all asking the same question: is this enough? She gave measured responses, never fully endorsing Ascendant's moves, nor outright condemning them. "It's a start," she kept repeating, "but real systemic change takes more than a press release." As if life needed to get more complicated, that very afternoon, her philanthropic foundation experienced a major setback. A promised donation from a corporate sponsor was abruptly rescinded. The sponsor cited the ongoing controversy as a reason to distance themselves. Imani was livid. She suspected Ascendant's behind-the-scenes influence, or at least the fear other corporations had of aligning with someone in a high-profile dispute. Regardless of the cause, it was a harsh reminder of the precarious tightrope she was walking. That night, as she juggled damage control for her non-profit, she received an email from a wealthy entrepreneur, Jonas Quinn, who expressed admiration for her courage. Quinn explained that he, too, had faced discrimination due to his background as a first-generation immigrant and was now eager to support Imani's philanthropic initiatives. In a single email, Quinn offered more than triple the amount that her withdrawn sponsor had promised. The note ended with, "People like you change the world. Let me help." Imani was stunned. Could this be a genuine ally? Or was he just capitalizing on her newfound fame? Still, her foundation needed funding to sustain its programs. After careful thought, she penned a polite reply, requesting a meeting to discuss the partnership in detail. When she closed her laptop, exhaustion pressed on her. She was in the fight of her life, dealing with corporate Goliaths, media scrutiny, and the financial volatility that came with being a public activist. And while she felt a surge of hope about Quinn's offer, she also braced herself for more twists. Little did she know, fate had far bigger plans in store, plans that would soon catapult her from being a spokesperson against discrimination to holding far more power than she ever imagined. When Imani finally met Jonas Quinn, she found him to be a soft-spoken man in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a wry, welcoming smile. They decided on a lunch meeting at a popular Atlanta restaurant known for its fusion cuisine, Asian-inspired Southern fare. Quinn arrived first, seated at a corner table. He stood as Imani approached, extending a hand. "Miss Bennett, a pleasure to meet you," he said, voice warm. "Likewise, Mr. Quinn," Imani replied, taking a seat. "Jonas, please," she smiled. Imani then. Small talk drifted over their table as they perused menus. Quinn asked about her non-profit, her background, her vision for educational reform. Imani spoke passionately about bridging resource gaps in underserved communities, providing scholarships and enhancing mentorship programs. Quinn listened intently, nodding at intervals, offering thoughtful queries. "So, let's cut to the chase," Quinn finally said, setting aside his menu. "I want to fund your foundation properly. Not just to replace your lost sponsor, but to scale your programs statewide and maybe nationally." Imani felt her pulse jump. "That's a lot of money." He gave a half shrug, eyes sparkling with conviction. "I have the resources, and I'm committed to fighting systemic inequities. Education is the root of everything. If we fix that, we fix a lot of problems." She studied him, trying to read any ulterior motives in his demeanor. "What do you get out of this, Jonas?" she asked bluntly. He broke into a wry grin. "You're honest. I like that. I grew up in a neighborhood where being a good student was frowned upon and teachers often wrote me off. If it weren't for a mentor who saw my potential, I wouldn't be here. Now that I've built my businesses and made my money, I want to pay it forward. Simple as that." Imani nodded, a wave of relief flooding her. "I respect that. All right, let's talk details about your donation." They spent the next hour discussing numbers, accountability measures, and long-term impact strategies. As the conversation wound down, Quinn leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Imani, you're not just any activist. You have a platform now, a national voice. The scandal with Ascendant Airways, yes, it's been painful, but it's also an opportunity. People are listening to you." She tilted her head. "I know, but I don't want that fiasco to define me." "Perhaps it doesn't have to," Quinn said gently. But consider this. Big corporations control how people travel, communicate, and even think. If the leadership at Ascendant doesn't truly commit to change or tries to sideline your demands, there might be another way. She raised an eyebrow. What do you have in mind? Quinn took a measured pause. I have significant investments in multiple industries, including aviation. Nothing massive yet, but I've had my eye on expanding. Rumor has it Ascendant stock prices are shaky after this scandal and some internal mismanagement. You see where I'm going? Imani's brow furrowed. She did see, but it sounded both audacious and unreal. You're talking about acquiring a stake in Ascendant? More than a stake, he corrected, eyes alight with a daring gleam. I'm considering a takeover buying controlling interest. If I can pull together enough capital and alliances, we could reshape that company from the inside out. But I'd need someone like you to spearhead the cultural transformation. The proposition hit Imani like a thunderbolt. That's a monumental undertaking. And you're not just anything, Imani. You're the face of change, a moral compass, and a savvy business mind from the look of your non-profit success. Imagine the statement. The very woman who was told to use the back entrance ends up at the helm. Poetic justice. If you ask me, Imani's mind spun with possibilities and doubts. Taking over an entire airline, that was the stuff of corporate titans, not philanthropic activists. Yet the idea had a potent allure, a chance to implement real systemic change, to dismantle prejudice from the top. Still, she was wary. This is huge, Jonas. How realistic is it? Quinn sipped his tea, calm. I have access to capital and connections with other investors who share a vision of social impact. Ascendant's market capitalization isn't small, but it's not Delta or American. If we strike while the scandal keeps the stock down, it could be feasible. But I'd need your partnership, not just as a figurehead, but as someone with the moral authority to make sure this takeover actually enacts positive change. Her heart hammered. Logically, the leap seemed insane. Emotionally, it resonated like a dream come true. She thought of Miss Watson's sneer, the humiliating directive to use a back entrance. She thought of the countless travelers who faced discrimination daily. Could she really help fix that system from within? Let me think about it, Imani said, voice tight with excitement and fear. I won't jump into anything without careful consideration. Quinn nodded. Absolutely. Take your time. I'll draft a proposal with the details and share it. But know this, opportunities like this don't come often. If you're in, we move fast. After they finished their meal, Quinn insisted on covering the bill. They parted with a handshake that felt charged with meaning. Imani drove home in a daze, mind racing with visions of corporate boardrooms, legal battles, and radical policy overhauls. She spent the night scribbling pros and cons in a notebook. Pro, real power to enforce anti-discrimination. Con, risk of financial ruin if the takeover fails. Pro, amplifies her voice and philanthropic goals. Con, she'd become a corporate executive overnight. Did she even want that? And an unspoken fear gnawed at her. If she tried and failed, it wouldn't just be her failure, it could reaffirm the very stereotypes she'd been fighting. But if she succeeded, the thought lingered in her dreams that night, fueling her ambition and stoking a fire in her soul she never knew she had. True to his word, Jonas Quinn sent Imani a detailed plan within days. He had arranged meetings with a coalition of investors, some philanthropic, some purely interested in the financial upside of buying a major stake in Ascendant Airways at a discount. The plan aimed to purchase enough shares to gain controlling votes on the board, effectively overshadowing Andrew Sutherland's leadership. Imani was stunned by the boldness of it. She attended discreet gatherings at private clubs and conference centers, learning about share prices, regulatory hurdles, and the possibility of launching a proxy fight if the current board resisted. This was an entirely different world, the cutthroat realm of corporate takeovers. At each meeting, Quinn introduced her as the moral backbone of the endeavor. Investors grilled her on her vision for the airline, and she responded with a combination of social justice values and business pragmatism. Over time, the group's confidence in her grew. They saw in Imani a rare mix of authenticity and strategic thinking. In tandem, Imani quietly ramped up her philanthropic efforts, ensuring her educational programs wouldn't be neglected. She hired additional staff, including a new program director, to keep her non-profit thriving if she shifted her focus. Word of a possible takeover began to trickle into rumors on Wall Street. Ascendant's stock price fluctuated wildly. Andrew Sutherland and his board launched aggressive stock buybacks to solidify their positions, but the scandal still weighed heavily on their brand. Amid the frenzy, another twist blindsided Imani. Deborah Price, Ascendant's PR director, requested a private off-the-record meeting. Despite her suspicions, Imani agreed, hoping perhaps Price wanted to share insider knowledge about systemic issues at Ascendant. They met at a quiet, suburban coffee shop. Price arrived looking uncharacteristically nervous, hair disheveled, glancing around as if expecting to be followed. "Thank you for meeting," Price began, voice taut. "I'll get right to the point. There's talk within Ascendant's executive circle about you, rumors that you might be part of a buyout attempt." Imani maintained a neutral expression. "Rumors abound in corporate settings. What's your point?" Price's eyes darted. "Sutherland has tapped private investigators to dig into your background, your non-profit's finances, anything they can use to discredit you." Imani felt a surge of indignation, but forced herself to stay calm. "That's quite an accusation. You have proof?" Price lowered her gaze. "I overheard phone calls, saw emails. They're serious about it. If you try to oust Sutherland, he'll play dirty. They're talking about bribes to certain media outlets, potential sabotage of your non-profit's reputation. They're even considering linking you to extremist groups, trying to paint you as a radical." Imani's mouth went dry. She'd expected resistance, but not such vicious tactics. "Why are you telling me this?" Price inhaled shakily. "I've worked in PR for a long time, and I believe in controlling narratives, but this crosses a line. The entire fiasco started with a racist incident on our watch. You deserve justice, not more character assassination. I wanted to warn you so you can protect yourself." Silent tension hung between them. Imani studied Price's face, searching for hidden motives. She saw only a weary sincerity. "Thank you for telling me," Imani said quietly, "but why not expose them yourself?" Price gave a rueful laugh. "I'm on contract. If I speak publicly, I lose my job, maybe face a lawsuit for breach of confidentiality. I have a family, but I couldn't stay silent and watch them destroy you." Imani reached out, resting a hand on Price's. "I understand. You did the right thing by coming to me." As they parted ways, Imani was left with a roiling mix of gratitude and fear. The stakes had escalated dramatically. Taking on Ascendant Airways was no longer a question of business strategy, it was a battle for her personal integrity. That night, she called Jonas Quinn, voice trembling with controlled fury. "Jonas, they're coming after me. Sutherland's launching a smear campaign." Quinn responded calmly. "I figured as much. It's standard procedure in hostile takeovers. Don't worry, I have top-notch lawyers and PR strategists who can counter whatever they throw at you." Imani paced her living room. "You say it's standard, but this is my life, my non-profit. They're going to try to ruin everything I've built." He paused. "I know, and I won't let that happen." You have to decide if we're still going forward. Because once we do, there's no turning back. She stared at her reflection in the dark window, heart thudding. She envisioned the humiliating day Watson told her to use the back entrance. She remembered the surge of righteous anger, the flood of support, and the children in her programs who looked up to her. "I'm in," she said, voice firm. "They won't scare me off." The next few weeks were a blur of clandestine meetings, financial maneuvers, and strategic planning. Jonas Quinn's coalition quietly amassed shares of Ascendant while Imani prepared for the public fallout. Sure enough, negative stories about Imani began to surface on obscure blogs and social media channels. Some alleged mismanagement of non-profit funds. Others insinuated she had ties to radical left-wing groups. None of it carried any real evidence. Still, doubt was a powerful tool, and these rumors spread like wildfire among certain segments of the public. To counter the smears, Imani hosted a transparent press conference. She invited respected figures from her non-profit's board, civic leaders, and even some beneficiaries of her programs to attest to her integrity. She presented audited financial statements and highlighted her philanthropic impact. The press conference aired live on several local stations, turning the tide in her favor once again. Meanwhile, Ascendant's board huddled with Andrew Sutherland, who had grown increasingly paranoid. Inside sources whispered that the airline's internal culture was spiraling. Mid-level managers whispered about top executives micromanaging. Customer complaints soared, employees felt demoralized, and flight delays became more frequent. The stock price continued to wobble. Imani's position remained publicly ambiguous. She never confirmed or denied involvement in any takeover. Yet behind closed doors, she worked with Quinn's team to craft a new leadership blueprint for Ascendant, one that placed diversity and ethical conduct at the forefront. The plan included fair wages for flight crews, robust anti-discrimination policies, and community outreach initiatives. As rumors of a hostile bid intensified, major news outlets jumped on the story. Headlines ranged from corporate giant shaken by racial profiling scandal to could a former victim of discrimination bust Ascendant's CEO? One late afternoon, Imani found herself back at the offices of Quinn's investment group, finalizing the strategy. She pored over spreadsheets detailing shares acquired and pledges from other investors who intended to vote out the current board. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call from a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated, then picked up. "Miss Bennett," an icy, familiar voice rasped. "It's Charlotte Watson." Imani's heart skipped. She hadn't heard from Watson since the flight attendant's termination. "Why are you calling me?" A bitter laugh filtered through the line. "Because it's not over. I tried to fight my firing with the union, but Ascendant pinned all the blame on me. I have no job. My reputation is trashed. Now I hear you might be taking over the company that ruined my life." Imani sank into a chair. The nerve of this woman, who had been the catalyst of her pain, now playing victim. "Miss Watson, you humiliated me publicly. I didn't do that to you, you did it to yourself." Watson's voice trembled with rage or desperation, maybe both. "I made a mistake, but Ascendant used me as a scapegoat. If you gain power in the airline, I want you to give me a chance at a hearing or compensation." Imani's skin crawled. The woman was asking for mercy after having shown her none. "Why would I do that?" "Because I'm a pawn in a bigger system, just like you were. You can talk all you want about changing the culture, but you won't fix it by throwing low-level employees under the bus. I'm not the only one who acted like that. They trained us to treat certain passengers with suspicion. I'm just the one who got caught on camera." Imani frowned, uncertain how to respond. Was Watson manipulating her or genuinely revealing a hidden rot within Ascendant's employee training programs? "I'll consider your words," Imani said finally, voice guarded. "Goodbye." She ended the call, unsettled. Jonas Quinn, seated across the table, raised an eyebrow. "Trouble? Just a ghost from my past," Imani muttered, but the conversation gnawed at her. If the flight attendant was right, Ascendant's issues were deeper than a single employee. Even if Imani and Quinn succeeded in their takeover, unraveling that ingrained bias would be a massive undertaking. Yet her resolve remained firm. This was precisely why the airline needed new leadership. She turned back to the spreadsheets, the share counts, the plan of action. They were close. Days later, the moment arrived. Jonas Quinn's coalition launched its formal bid for control of Ascendant Airways, offering shareholders a premium on their stock. This triggered an emergency board meeting at Ascendant. Andrew Sutherland appeared on business news channels, railing against the opportunistic predators trying to dismantle his company. Imani remained composed, issuing a short statement. "My involvement is driven by the desire for systemic change. If the current leadership won't address pervasive discrimination, then we must seek new leadership." The story caught fire across major networks. Cable news ran segments featuring corporate analysts debating whether the takeover would succeed. Civil rights leaders chimed in, many endorsing Imani's push for reform. Critics accused her of being power-hungry, while supporters hailed her as a trailblazer. As the shareholder vote approached, Ascendant stock soared on speculation of a buyout. Some long-time investors felt loyalty to Sutherland, but many were swayed by the promise of a payout and renewed growth under Quinn and Bennett's vision. On the morning of the vote, Imani arrived at Ascendant's headquarters, flanked by Quinn and a team of lawyers. The atmosphere crackled with tension. Media crews lined the sidewalks. Employees peered from windows, torn between fear and hope. Inside, the board convened in a grand conference hall. Security was tight. Andrew Sutherland sat at the head of a long table, flanked by his remaining loyalists. Imani and Quinn sat at the opposite end, flanked by their own group. The room was packed with shareholders, attorneys, and press. When the votes were finally tallied, the outcome was clear. Quinn's coalition had secured a controlling percentage of shares. Sutherland's face turned ashen. A mix of cheers and gasps erupted throughout the hall. Sutherland rose, eyes blazing, pointing a finger at Imani. "This is a travesty. You orchestrated this chaos for your personal vendetta." Imani stood calmly, meeting his glare. "I wanted change and justice. You chose not to cooperate when you had the chance." Security stepped in before Sutherland could retaliate. The board's legal counsel announced the transition of leadership. Quinn would take over as interim chairman, and a new CEO would be named someone who reflected the new vision of the company. The tension in the room was electric. On the periphery, employees whispered. Some stared at Imani with awe, others with apprehension. She had gone from a victim of discrimination to a woman on the cusp of major corporate power. Sutherland stormed out, ignoring calls for comment. Cameras flashed, capturing his disgraced exit. Imani felt no triumph in his downfall, only a sober sense of responsibility. A moment later, Quinn placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's done," he said quietly. "Now the real work begins." She nodded, heart pounding. Yes, she thought, now the real work begins. The days after the takeover were an emotional whirlwind. Employees at Ascendant Airways braced for sweeping changes. Imani took the helm as the new CEO, a decision supported unanimously by Quinn's coalition. She spent her first week in back-to-back meetings with department heads, union representatives, and outside consultants specializing in corporate reform. One of her early orders of business was a thorough audit of human resources policies, uncovering unsettling details about internal biases, rigged training materials, and managers who reinforced discriminatory attitudes. Imani fired several high-ranking officials who had turned a blind eye. She established hotlines and whistleblower protections, encouraging employees to speak out against injustices. Meanwhile, Andrew Sutherland retreated from public life, quietly selling his remaining shares. Rumors suggested he faced multiple investigations for financial misdeeds unrelated to Imani's case. Hard karma, indeed. The man who once wielded corporate power with impunity now faced the twilight of a tarnished career. Imani found a certain poetic justice in that outcome, yet she never gloated. Instead, she channeled her energy into building a diverse leadership team. She recruited from historically black colleges and universities, expanded Ascendant's philanthropic outreach to support underprivileged communities, and pioneered new mentorship programs within the company. And then, in a twist of fate that felt right, she reopened communication with Charlotte Watson. Watson, struggling to find employment, had reached out with a detailed account of how flight attendants were sometimes trained to watch travelers of color more closely, all under the guise of enhanced security. Imani gave Watson a chance to testify before an independent panel investigating Ascendant's practices. The panel confirmed that Watson had acted in a discriminatory manner, but it also found that the airline's environment promoted such biases. As a result, Watson received a modest settlement for being scapegoated on the condition that she complete an intensive re-education program before reapplying for any airline position. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but a recognition that real change required addressing root causes. Watson left the hearing in tears, perhaps confronting the cost of her own bigotry. Months passed, and Ascendant Airways rebounded. Customer satisfaction ratings climbed. The airline's rebranding campaign centered on unity, diversity, and accountability resonated with the public. Financial analysts praised the new leadership, calling it the turnaround of the decade. Through it all, Imani never lost sight of her original mission. She continued to fund her educational nonprofits, funneling a portion of Ascendant's profits into scholarships and community programs. She toured Ascendant hubs around the country, shaking hands with mechanics, gate agents, and flight attendants. Everywhere she went, she preached a message of respect and inclusion. Slowly but surely, the culture shifted. Employees felt heard, passengers felt welcomed, and the shadow of that scandal began to dissolve, replaced by a blossoming sense of possibility. One crisp morning, nearly a year after that fateful flight, Imani found herself standing in the exact spot at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, where Watson had once told her to use the back entrance. A wave of memory washed over her anger, humiliation, fear. But as she gazed at the new signage Ascendant had installed, "Welcome, everyone, we're glad you're here," she realized the power of transformation. No longer was she the passenger, forced aside. Now, she led the airline, determined to ensure no one else ever felt unwanted at the gateway to the skies. Power can come from unexpected places. A single racist encounter at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport ignited a journey of defiance, courage, and hope. In confronting humiliation, Imani transformed her anger into a calling so forceful that it reshaped an entire corporation. She not only claimed her rightful place at the front entrance, but she built a brand new door, one open to travelers of all backgrounds, employees of every stripe, and a vision of equality that reached far beyond airports. Yet her story is more than a corporate takeover or a personal triumph. It's a reminder that with enough resolve, any of us can challenge entrenched powers and win. If this story moved or inspired you, please share it with others who might need to hear it. Subscribe for more eye-opening stories and join us in continuing the fight for justice, one courageous step at a time.